salary experience?
So we got 7 points right now. You look good. It's really pinned down.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for coming. This is Including Models in Science Literacy, an expansion of scientific literacy to include physical modeling. My name is Patrick Bond. I'm a master's student at Warner in the Get Real Science program. And this is...
I'm Brianne Walsh. I'm a science communicator at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. And I am here because I actually, as a science communicator, you're probably wondering what does that even mean? I have a background in science. I have a master's in marine science and environmental science. And as a science communicator, I work with different scientists and researchers and agencies and kind of take their data and translate that into more public-friendly, policy-friendly information. So we produce a lot of different communication materials, translating science into a more visual format. So one of the tools that we use with people is conceptual diagrams. So we try to get very visual representations of scientific processes or ecosystems and make those into visual representations, which kind of goes along with that conceptual model that we're going to talk about.
And so I've taught down in Maryland for a few years, and I've worked with Ian scientists in the past in my classroom, and Brianne has come in to help out with Get Real Science also this year, just in some of our classes also.
Do you remember when I came to class that Friday night? I was so fired up about conceptual diagrams, and we all drew them. This is their fault, just so you know. Okay.
Oh, does it work?
Real quick. Yeah. Maybe.
Alright, so first thing that we want to clarify is that we're going to be talking about two types of models tonight. So we have conceptual models and physical models. Conceptual models, these are our cognitive understanding of important relationships between components of a system or a process. It also could be how we conceive of a general set of attributes. So for instance, how we conceive of matter, or how we conceive of energy, or how we conceptualize forces. Oftentimes our conceptual models are simplifications of more complex laws, and for our students, what they can be and what they are is the initial steps that lead to a greater or more thorough understanding of a certain phenomenon. Then we also have physical models. These are simplified representations of our conceptual models. They bring certain things into focus. So physical models can be a drawing, they can be a 3D representation, it can be a computer representation, it can be an animation, it can be a movie. It's how we are displaying in a physical way our conceptual understanding of a phenomenon. So for instance, I could draw an atom and demonstrate my understanding or how I conceptualize an atom. I could create a energy pyramid for an ecosystem, and that would be an example of a physical model. So why do we want to talk about models in the first place? Well, with the new standards that are being rolled out in New York State, they're based on the Next Generation Science Standards, which are in turn based on this documentation that was created by the National Research Council called Framework for K-12 Science Education. And in the framework, the principal concern for what science education should amount to is preparing students for their individual lives and roles as citizens in a technology-rich and scientifically complex world. So what this means is that in order to prepare them for this technology-rich and scientifically complex world, we have to include modeling in that. So you might be asking yourself, but Patrick and Brianne, why do we need to include modeling in that? Well, conceptual models actually relate to how we understand the world. And when we want to understand phenomena and things we're seeing, what we're actually doing is creating conceptual models of that phenomenon. These are the personal science theories that we use to understand the universe or the world around us. It's how we actually conceive of something we're seeing. It's how we conceptualize it. So even whether you like it or not, you're making models. For the student, when they experience some phenomena or when they're investigating it in class, they're going to be making those conceptual models of that phenomena. For instance, matter is made of particles. What often happens in a traditional science classroom is that these conceptual models get boxed up. So we have a conceptual model for matter is made of particles, and that's only related to matter being made of particles. But conceptual models do not actually work independently, and in science especially. So we have, for this more complex science phenomena, heat rising, or causing hot air to rise, we have multiple conceptual models working together to create a more thorough understanding of this phenomena. So we want to allow students the opportunities to integrate and sort of mix their conceptual models together. So what about physical models? So physical models are representations. They can be personal, they can be incomplete, they can be inaccurate, but they are still very, very valuable because what the physical model does, the physical representation, is allow us to make that student's conceptualization physical and visible. So it's making the student's thinking visible. It's allowing us to see what the student is thinking, where misconceptions might occur, to point out those misconceptions, and allow the students opportunities to revise the conceptual model that they have to understand that phenomenon.
And so physical models are representations, and they help us navigate and understand what can really be pretty complex data. And if you think about just the general day and how you are exposed to models throughout the day, they are everywhere, from the Weather Channel to maps. I think that's the water cycle up there on the right-hand corner. So they help us navigate and understand our world, and it's great if students can be able to take those conceptual models in their head and put those down as physical models on their own, and not just from being given that model and presented to them.
So when we think about how models are used in a traditional or more traditional science classroom, what they're being used as is tools for explanation. So the student is being given the Bohr's model of an atom and saying this is what an atom looks like. And then maybe they'll memorize it or create their own models using Skittles so they can remember it for the test. They might be given the cell model, an animal cell model, and they're going to remember what this looks like, and they're going to say this is what a animal cell looks like. Maybe they'll make their own out of styrofoam or like a cake, which is always fun, and that will help them remember it for the future. Or they're going to be given the layers of the Earth in a diagram, and maybe again they're going to create their own 3D representation of it. But it's being used to explain the phenomenon, it's saying this is how it happens. And so the point here isn't that these things are bad, but that we have to move beyond this. What we want students doing is using models to adjust their conceptual understanding of the phenomena. So when we look at how NGSS is organized, what we're moving to is really sort of a three-tier system where we have disciplinary core ideas, and this is where the bulk of traditional science standards lie. So this is like the facts and the content, the science content that science need to know. And then we have cross-cutting concepts. This is larger ideas that are used throughout the sciences, and oftentimes it's how scientists can frame their questions. So this is things like how scale or proportion interact, or how systems work. And so those types of ideas are found throughout the sciences, and scientists might use them to further their understanding of a certain idea. What we want students doing, and what more emphasis is placed on in NGSS, is this idea of being scientific and the actual scientific practices that scientists engage in. So it's what scientists are doing. We want students to take those disciplinary core ideas and the cross-cutting concepts and use those to be scientific. So this is things like analyzing and interpreting data, asking questions, and then of course developing and using models. And when we actually look at what scientists are doing, there's really three main categories that scientists sort of work in. They gather, they reason, and they communicate. But when we look at those scientific practices that NGSS has sort of defined, we can see that models are found in each of those components. We use models to gather data and information. We use models to predict and develop evidence, and we use models to communicate. So models are very, very important, especially these physical models.
So physical models are a specialized language, and they're a form of literacy that must be practiced. And so humans perceive objects in one of many ways, either sound, sight, touch, smell, or taste. And so visuals, through visuals, we can really interpret information, data through a visual format, and it can be conveyed and better understood rather than, just reading 200 words of text about that topic. And so the pieces of developing these models and diagrams are pretty specialized. So we want to use symbols that have significant meaning, and that needs to be practiced and understood. So you need to be able to understand what these symbols are that you're looking at and kind of have this visual language. And we're exposed to symbols throughout our daily life everywhere. Like on this college campus, I'm sure that there are symbols. You walk by symbols that you don't even notice at this point in time. And symbols can represent something tangible, so they could be something like a bird, a box of colored pencils, an instrument that's used for collecting data, or they can represent something invisible or intangible. So something that a student's not necessarily able to see, but a process. So just for an example, on the left, CO2 is being absorbed, oxygen is being released. We're using that to symbolize photosynthesis. And so this is just an example of a diagram that we created for a report card. And so we had a group of stakeholders in a room, and they were trying to compare a degraded environment in Samoa to a desired environment. So we made a list of how that would look before we even got to drawing this. And so you can see how we took that information and created symbols to make a really visual statement, and you can tell based on just comparing degraded, if there are no words here, you'd be able to tell that there was a difference between these two systems. And so thinking about what students are exposed to, I know Pat has what's your term that you use?
Well, prior knowledge.
Prior knowledge. So thinking about these stoplight colors, so relating green is good and red is bad. Anytime we do any sort of report card, we use those green to red colors. And then thinking about the ways that you're using symbols, so the sizes, the shapes, the directions. So here we have high turbidity, which is high inputs of sediments into the system. So it's larger in the degraded versus the desired, it's smaller. Thinking about biodiversity, so you can tell here we have 2 species of fish. On the desired side, we have many species of fish, so that's representing biodiversity. And then also thinking about integrating these symbols into the legend and explaining what is going on in this diagram, not just listing out the legend on the side, but including some sort of context for the viewer. So students need to be able to start creating and manipulating and practicing creating these types of models, to share knowledge, to be able to co-construct models and an understanding of phenomena. And so these can help clarify thinking. If you're drawing this model, it'll help you go through the steps of what's happening, facilitate communication. If you're leaving something out, if someone has another opinion, you're able to talk that through, and then also identify gaps in your knowledge. What's missing from that model? What pieces do you need to, add some more on? Anything else?
Great.
Okay. So we're going to do a little activity, which I'm sure some of you now have done before, but
Sorry.
this is just something, I know. We actually do this with researchers and scientists to practice creating their own conceptual models with something that they are actually working on. So we call this conceptionary. It's very similar to Pictionary. And so we have cards, and each card is going to have a concept on it, and then a definition and a keyword. So your goal, and we're going to split into 3 different groups, is that one person's going to draw. So someone's going to not show your other team members what the concept on the card is, and you're going to draw with the colored pencils that concept. And your team members, you want them to be able to get these keywords and then that overall concept. So I'm going to hand that over.
So if you want to start, get these to meet Mike, so scoot over there.
I don't draw one.
I'll draw with you. Yes.
Yeah, that'd be good.
As last time. Okay. Now, these are pretty environmentally focused concepts because of who they're coming from.
Yes.
But
So this is, I have used conceptionary in my classrooms before, and I've actually used it as test review, which is the exact kind of use of models that we want to move away from, but it was beneficial to students in preparing them for the test, because they would have the concepts already, and then they would try to represent them in a visual way. Do you have any other?
instructions?
Yeah.
No, so we're gonna give you about a minute and a half to draw. I guess we have 2 minutes left.
We have 8 minutes.
Okay, so a minute and a half to draw, so whoever's drawing,
Based on my.
you have your concept.
And so I do try to think about how the game is making you feel, especially the drawer, the person drawing. Try to think about how this whole thing is making you feel in the moment.
I will start a timer.
Stop.
So you have to get the keywords first and the concept.
I can't.
Either way.
That is the goal, but you have a minute and a half. So
Go ahead and get started, folks. You can get 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
We'll give them 2 minutes.
Okay.
Think that-
Buildings?
Environmental,
Urban?
forest, deforestation. Woods,
So that's something.
water cycle.
Oh.
Urban something or other, like a industrialization or something. Oh, good one. Nice. You're really thinking now. Did you do that recently?
No.
No, it's not working.
Butterfly.
Okay.
You sure it's on the ball thing?
Good job.
Nature versus.
Less than a minute. We're good.
We're good.
Less than a minute.
Nice.
Like,
Did you get everything?
you guys
The
hear
keywords too?
Stay back.
that, like,
Question for you.
Yeah.
Down.
this leads to
Is one of the goals or models
Down.
having that lot of
to create a model without words
You create the
to
climb of
explain
space.
phenomena?
But you think, you guys
Or
So I think sometimes
You guys pretty much.
I don't really, I can't think of the concept.
it'd be impossible to do.
Is this like life cycle or like survival?
Unless it was like a combination symbol.
Okay.
So even in the like the
Larva.
example, they had the text explaining the diagram below. The key sort of placed right in
The
there.
city is gone.
So I don't think you can't remove
Okay,
the words
alright, that's at first,
entirely.
and then you add the city, and then you lose
As
stuff.
you know, we're all using
Dies.
symbols a little
So
bit
it's like
different.
a decay.
And that's one of the other ways you want to have that sort of common
Air
literacy,
pollution.
that element that we use different
Yes, it is.
components of semiotics and like symbols, like bigger arrows mean.
Are you working on the main
more,
concept or the little
smaller
concept?
arrows are like
But
concept
I
colors.
got a
Reds and black being bad, and like greens and blues being better. So it's a, you know, you want to have that.
So there's some level of common knowledge based upon the
Right.
symbols. So then based upon that,
Is this
theoretically you
one?
should be able to draw a diagram of a noun or a concept or something
Yeah.
without using words.
I mean, potentially, yeah. I don't know if there's like a
That's not-
universal
that's not
symbol
one of the
or.
goals.
I
Not-
can't,
no.
I'm not,
No,
yeah,
necessarily.
this is very
Or
environmental.
would you say that, okay, to dominate your time?
No,
I
it's not.
understand the concept, but I can't think of the
The
word.
concept of using analogies, how does that play into the,
Well, I think modeling is a form of analogy.
I do, yeah, okay.
Right? So you're taking that conceptual
You've got like
understanding and
life,
making it
each of the
physical.
words.
Where did I-
It's not gonna be abstract.
What's so?
Yeah.
chemistry?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So the concept of analogies is so crucial,
Yeah.
because you can't see what's going on, but you can create some sort of visual model.
Yeah, they help us see the invisible. I think we have about 30 more seconds to say.
Development, habitat loss, decrease.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I'll use mildly.
Yeah, those are very specific.
So just to summarize, the concept was development's impact on wildlife, and the definition was increased development such as urban sprawl destroys wildlife habitat, resulting in decreased species diversity. So just to illustrate in a minute and a half, there's 3 very different models of biodiversity's impact on urban sprawl's impact on wildlife. And you can illustrate these complex processes with many pieces very simply, just starting with a piece of paper and some color pencils.
And so there's 2 sort of key components that I'd want to point out. You want to have a conversation or encourage students to have a conversation about the models that are being created. Like why are some more successful than others? Why do some allow other students or others to understand the model more quickly? So having that metacognition and that meta-conversation about the actual drawing and the process itself and the symbols that are being used. So that's very, very important to the students' understanding of why models are in science and why we use them and how they are used. The other thing is, so I asked the drawers to kind of think about how this made them feel. So what was it like to have just a blank page and being asked to draw the concept? Anybody want to share?
I liked it.
You liked
Yeah.
it?
I didn't find the blank page particularly intimidating. I found getting my group to say the actual words and not something close to the words really hard.
Yeah. And I think you can have some leniency there, I don't know.
All right. Well, I was a strict judge.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Definitely didn't do that, Jess.
Yeah, so oftentimes what
Did
we'll
not say
see
habitat,
with
so.
students is that just having the blank page can be really intimidating. And so one of the ways you can get around that is by using things like a symbols bank, the same way you might have a word bank. So a list of symbols that they can use, or even just symbols that they can drag on into a box or place into a box to create the model that they need to create. The other thing I want to point out is, so the organization that Brianne works for has,
I gotta figure out how to get this on the screen.
if you just hit escape. The organization that Brianne works for has a number of web-based resources that students can use in creating physical models. So they have a symbols library. So this would be an entire
Sorry.
digital library that students can use, download images to create models with using some other software. They also have an actual web-based diagram creation tool on their website that
Unfortunately, is not working right now.
Not working right now.
But we've actually done we've had student groups where you could put a base on this. So down in Maryland, the Chesapeake Bay, so we would put a base of a Chesapeake Bay outline, and one side would be clean water, one side would be dirty water, and we would ask the students, what would you put on either side of this? What would go in the degraded side? What would go in the desired side? So it's a really easy way for students to just click and paste and put those symbols into either side of that ecosystem.
Yeah, I've used it with my students, and it's a lot of fun for them to even just make models. But it can get rid of some of that sort of hesitance or the intimidation of just being asked to draw something without having that literacy of what symbols mean, commonly used symbols, or how to create them. So just two things we wanted to share with you. That's it from us. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
We'll be around for the
Yeah.
rest of the evening.
Yeah? And if you want to know anything more about Ian or UMCs and what Brianne does, I think she's got business cards and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, thank you.
So at this point, if you guys want to head upstairs, there's still refreshments upstairs, and we'll go on to our next part of the program.